Okay, so last time we left off in the height of the drama, which was that story was she opens up, he is knocking on the door, she doesn't want to open. She's too comfortable in her circumstances, she's too comfortable in bed, and by the time eventually, because of his knocking, her heart is stirred and she comes to open the door. By the time she opens the door, he's gone. And she goes looking for him and she can't find him. This time we read that the guards of the city find her, and at this time they beat her, they take away either her garment or her jewelry, and it ends up with the conclusion where she says, I adjure you, daughters of Jerusalem, that if you find my beloved, what would you tell him? Unlike in the past, where she keeps saying, don't awaken the love when it's premature. Instead, this time she says, tell them, if you find my beloved, tell him, shecholat ahava ani, I am lovesick. That's what we discussed last week. After that happens, that we mentioned it briefly, but the second half of chapter number 5, is the daughters of Jerusalem want to know what is special about this person, this guy that you're so devoted to. And she goes, how many verses? Verse 10 to verse 16, and she praises him, which I think, I haven't seen this written explicitly. I don't think I've seen it written explicitly, but I think that's interesting that she doesn't describe him, or she doesn't articulate why she loves him, until what's so great about him, until after the separation. In other words, once she is lovesick, once she can't find him, and we said historically that we're referring to the time of the exile. Now in the exile, now she can articulate 6 verses about what's so unique about him. So that was the end of chapter 5. Now we want to go to chapter 6 and see where the story takes us. So again, I'm just going to open up chapter 5 quickly. The end of chapter 5 was verse 9. After this plot that we read last week, what is your beloved more than another beloved, O fairest of women? In other words, what's unique about him? What is your beloved more than another beloved that you have so adjured us? You made us promise that if we find him, we'll tell him you're lovesick. And here she goes, my beloved is white and ruddy, surrounded by myriads. His head is as the fine as gold. His locks are curled. They are as black as a raven, etc., etc. Goes all the way down. Finally, verse 16, his palate is sweet, and he is altogether desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. Right? Because the beginning, in verse 9, they said, Ma dodech, what is unique about your beloved? So she gives the whole speech of 6 verses, and then she concludes, this is my beloved, daughters of Jerusalem. Fine. Now, here it gets a little bit interesting, because again, if we're in exile, what happened in exile historically? What happens is that the people of the nations of the world are asking the Jewish people, are trying to convince the Jewish people that even though they were the chosen people, even though they did have a relationship with God, but now God has abandoned the Jewish people, and the Jewish people took a lot of strength to ignore that thought and say no, and understand that the exile does not mean an abandonment of God. An exile is just part of the love story between God and the Jewish people. But the claim of the nations of the world is that God has abandoned us. Now, if you look at the song, you see, in a sense, the nations of the world are taunting the Jewish people. So the other women are taunting this girl and saying, where has your beloved gone, O fairest of women? Where has your beloved turned, that we may seek him with you? In other words, you're saying he's so great, you're so in love with him because he's so great, but where is he? And we're happy to go looking for him with you, right? But it seems like this is not that they're trying to help her. It seems like they're trying to taunt her, if indeed you have this deep relationship, so where did he disappear? Now she responds, verse 2, my beloved has gone down to his garden, to the spice beds, to graze in the gardens, and to gather roses. This is a very interesting verse, and here there are many ways to read it. And here you can read this in a positive way or in a negative way. This is very interesting. So let's take a look for a second. What are the possibilities? What are the possibilities here? Rashi, historically, is going to read this in a positive sense. So we'll leave Rashi for another time. In other words, we'll get to him in a minute. But some people read the story on a basic level, and they're saying that this woman is now nervous. She indeed is nervous. She is nervous that her beloved indeed has other loves, and he's following other people. And if you notice, if you realize from the beginning of the book, there's this tension that she wants to have intimacy with him. She wants to be with him alone, but he is the king, so he's surrounded with other women, with all the daughters of Jerusalem, because he can't be with one person. He's the king. And if you will see a little bit further, we'll see this in the verses. We'll see this a little further that this could be what's happening over here. In other words, she is now nervous that what the other daughters of Jerusalem are telling her. They're saying, where is your beloved? Where has he gone? She's starting to get nervous. Where indeed has he gone? And then if you read verse 2, my beloved has gone down to his garden, to the spice beds, to graze in the gardens and to gather roses. What does it mean to gather roses? So to gather roses could mean he's going to find other people. Again, Rashi doesn't read it this way. We'll get to the historical interpretation in a minute, but this could be a straightforward reading. And if that's the case, what does she respond? I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine, who grazes among the roses. So she is saying, from my perspective, I am devoted to him, and he's devoted to me. Where is he now? Now, but she keeps going back to the fact that he is grazing amongst the roses. So, at least in the simple level, many people read that this is a problem. She now is not sure about, she knows she is lovesick for him, but she is not sure about what is his relationship with her, because now they're in exile. Now maybe he's amongst other roses. Now other nations are becoming successful. So from her perspective, she is in a state of uncertainty. What happens next is very interesting. From verse 4 all the way to verse 9, we have him speaking. Now, we don't think he's speaking to her, even though he's speaking in the first person. We don't know if the meeting happens. But this is the voice of the man, and he is telling her, and he's praising her, talking about her beauty. And the reason why it makes sense to say what I said till now, which is that in the beginning of the chapter, she is not sure about, she's worried about whether or not he is grazing in the roses, trying to find somebody else, is because the conclusion of all his love to her is verse 6, 8, and 9, and you'll see that 8 and 9 addresses this concern. So let's read verse 4, right? So verse 4 is his response. Again, they didn't meet. She still didn't find him. He is gone. The daughters of Jerusalem say, where is your beloved? She says, I don't know. My beloved is grazing amongst the roses. That could not, there are other interpretations, but it could be a euphemism for maybe he's finding other people. And now it's his turn to respond. But he doesn't respond to her directly, but the narrator knows that this is what he's saying. And it's interesting, he's speaking in first person. You are fear, my beloved. Yafa, you're beautiful, my beloved, as Tirzah, calmly as Jerusalem, awesome as the bannered legions. Turn away your eyes from me, for they have made me haughty. Your hair is like a flock of goats that stream down from Gilad. So we're going to focus on verse 5. But before we get to verse 5, I want to get the big picture. So he's praising her. He's saying, don't look at me. When you look at me, it makes me feel too great. He praises her hair, right? Your hair is like a flock of goats that stream down from Gilad. Gilad is one of the mountains, probably in the Golan Heights region. And over there, when the flocks of goats travel down the mountain, it looks like the hair flowing down from her back. Verse 6, your teeth are like a flock of ewes that came up from the washing, all of which are perfect, and there is no bereavement among them. Okay, beautiful. Your temple is like a split pomegranate from beneath your kerchief. Beautiful. He's praising here. Now, look what he says here. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines and innumerable maidens. Okay, so he's addressing this idea. There's so many people in this king's life, in God's life, there's so many nations. So in the man's life, he's indeed, if the man is King Solomon, he's grazing amongst the roses. In other words, he has other women in his life. Verse 9, however, in other words, despite the fact that there are 60 queens, 80 concubines, and innumerable maidens, my dove, my perfect one, is but one. Achati yonati. My dove is one. In other words, she's singular. She's not in the category of everybody else. She is one to her mother. She is pure one of she who bore her. In other words, she's pure to her mother. Daughters saw her and praised her. Queens and concubines, and they lauded her. So this seems to be what's happening here, is that after she is concerned that maybe now in exile, maybe now when they're not together, maybe now he's got his eyes elsewhere and he's following other people and he's developing other relationships. He's grazing amongst the roses. He responds, praising her, and he says, "Yes, it may be that there are 60 queens, 80 concubines, innumerable maidens, but my dove, my perfect one, is one." In other words, that despite the exile, despite the fact that there are many other nations and God is the king of everybody, there's a unique relationship between the man and this girl, this woman, and we're going to read it between God and the Jewish people. So that is just to give the simple flow of the story, even before you get to the historical perspective and before you get to the Hasidic perspective. So that's stage one. And your comments or questions, as always, are welcome. Okay, so you just want to read it a little bit. Now we're going to read from the historic perspective, which is a little bit different. From the historic perspective, she's not concerned that her beloved has abandoned her the way I said it. But nevertheless, let's read a Rashi here too. We'll see what happens. Where has your beloved gone, O fairest of women? So what does Rashi say? Where has your beloved gone? The nations taunt and provoke Israel. Where has your beloved gone? Why has he left you abandoned like a widow? Okay. That is the question. What does she answer? My beloved has gone down to his garden, to the spice garden, to graze in the gardens and to gather roses. What is the response from the historical perspective? Historical perspective is we are now coming back after the exile, because again, the exile is the separation between God and the Jewish people, which happened when he was knocking on the door and we were asleep in bed. Now she says, God told us to come back and rebuild the second temple. So but my beloved has gone to his garden. We're in Babylonia. We have to go back to the garden. What's the garden? The garden is building of the temple. Because remember a few weeks ago in chapter 5, we said, Bati Lagani, I've come to my garden. And that meant either the giving of a Torah or the building of the tabernacle. So now once again, we're building the second temple. And he will be there with us. To the spice beds, right? The verse says, my beloved has gone down to the garden to the spice beds. What is the spice beds? That refers to the spices offered in the service of the temple, to the place where the incense is burnt, to graze in the gardens. And further, this is very interesting, and further, he went down to pasture his flock in the gardens where they were scattered, i.e. those who did not come up from the exile. He causes the Shekhinah to rest upon them in the synagogues and in the study halls. This is unbelievable. What's happening here is, when you read the story on a literal level, it could say, oh, my beloved has gone. He's scattered. He went to all different places to graze amongst the roses. So you could read this literally, and some people read it that way, that the woman is concerned that her husband now is going, that her beloved, I don't know if he's a beloved, is going now and finding other people to love. And that is a challenge to her relationship with her beloved. But historically, what Rashi says is that what the Jewish people respond is no. What they respond is that, first of all, My beloved has gone to the garden, which means we're going to rebuild the second temple, or maybe the third temple. But here's the key. When it says my beloved has gone to graze amongst the roses, that means he goes throughout the exiles. Because even though some people came to rebuild the second temple, but most of the Jewish people, many Jewish people, remained in Babylonia. So what she's saying now is that in Babylonia, God goes and is scattered throughout the world, throughout the exile, going to the study halls and to the houses of prayer of the Jewish people, and to rest his divine presence in those places. In other words, wherever we are, wherever the Jewish people are in exile, and we create a place of Torah study, that is where God is going to graze. And then Rashi continues, this is very beautiful, and to gather roses, he listens and hearkens to those who speak of his Torah, to collect their merits and to inscribe them in a memorial book before him. As it is stated in Malachi, then the God-fearing men spoke, and a book of remembrance was written before him. Now concerning your request to seek with us and to build with us, I am my beloved's, but you are not his. And you shall not build with us. As it is stated, it is not for you and for us to build a house for our God. And scripture states further, and you have no portion or right or memorial in Jerusalem. What's happening here is very interesting. So what's happening here is the first half of the verse says she responds. In verse 4, she responds, my beloved has gone to the garden, which is to the temple. We're going to rebuild the second temple. And then he went to graze amongst the gardens. That means to go to all the study halls and all the synagogues throughout the exile, throughout the diaspora, and to do what? To gather the roses. To gather the roses means to gather the good deeds of the Jewish people. Now, what is the meaning of verse 3? I am to my beloved is mine, who grazes among the roses. In other words, we have a unique relationship. Rashi says, you said in the beginning of chapter 6, you said, right at the beginning of the chapter, the nations of the world said, where has your beloved gone, O fairest of women? Where has your beloved turned, that we may seek him with you? In other words, they say, oh, your beloved has gone. We'll find, why don't we search for him together? What the woman responds, no. I have a unique relationship with him. You cannot mix in. You don't come in. We don't need your help. I don't need your help finding him. And Rashi says that means when it comes to the building of the temple, when there were other people who tried to help Ezra build the temple, Ezra said, no, the temple is a house for the Jewish people to build to God. It's a unique relationship, and therefore we don't want other people participating in the building. So even though Isaiah says in the end of days, my Beiti Beit Tfilah, my house will be a house of prayer for all nations, that's true, it's all nations, but nevertheless to build the temple has to be built from the Jewish people specifically, because our relationship is unique. So according to this reading, the historical reading, when the nations of the world ask the Jewish people, where is the God during exile? There's a twofold response. Two-pronged response. First of all, yes, God told us to come back and build a temple. So in other words, either in the times of the temple, second temple, or even now, we're working on rebuilding the temple, either literally or figuratively. But then there's also a point, where is God? You want to know where he is? He's grazing amongst the gardens, amongst the roses. What does that mean? To graze in the gardens and to gather roses. What does it mean to graze in the gardens? To graze in the gardens means to go to where the Jewish people are in the diaspora, in the study halls and in the houses of prayer. That's her response to the people taunting her, according to the historic perspective, according to Rashi. Okay, this is all introduction. What I really want to get to is his praise to her. So we continue, we mentioned this earlier. He is praising her. And then verse 5 is a very strange praise. So in the beginning, it's nice. Verse 4 is beautiful. You are fear my beloved as Tirzah. You are holy. You are comely as Jerusalem. What is Tirzah? Tirzah is the name of a city in Israel, which was supposed to be a beautiful city. So you're as beautiful, Yafa, you're as nice, as beautiful, you're fear as my beloved as Tirzah, and comely as Jerusalem. Awesome as the bannered legions. What are the bannered legions? The bannered legions are when the Jewish people left Egypt, so it's two interpretations. Rashi says it could refer to the angels who are divided in groups, or you could say that it refers to the Jewish people. When the Medrash says it refers to the Jewish people when they left Egypt and they were in the desert with the temple in middle, and the four camps of three tribes apiece surrounded the temple, each one with its own with its own degel, with their own flag. And this is a play of the world. Legions need galot. The root is degel. The root is flag. Legions have flags, but that's another case. So he is praising her. Wonderful, wonderful. Verse 5 is the beginning of verse 5 is a strange place. Strange phrase. Turn away your eyes from me, for they have made me haughty. What does that even mean? You want to say how much you love somebody, how beautiful she is, and then you say, turn away from me because when you look at me, it makes me haughty. What does that mean? And then he continues praising her. Your hair is like a flock of goats that stream down from Gilad. What is going on here? What is it? Why are we telling someone, if you love somebody, why are you telling them to turn away from you? And what has it got to do with the hair? So according to the mystical interpretation, everything is going to make sense. And here's a tremendous idea. And it's revolutionary, even to the song, even to everything we set up to this point, in some sense. Okay, so let's see if we can unpack this. Says Rashi, chapter 6, verse 5, turn away your eyes from me. What does that mean? Turn away your eyes from me, says Rashi, as a young man whose betrothed is dear and sweet to him, and her eyes are comely. And he says to her, turn away your eyes from me, for when I see you, my heart becomes haughty and proud, and my spirit becomes arrogant, and I cannot resist. So what does this mean? This means, in a simple sense, that he's in love with her so much, he says, I can't handle it. You look at me, I become too arrogant. Please don't look at me. Please turn away from me. Okay, wonderful way of expressing love. It's a little strange, but fine. Fine with me. Let's see how Rashi reads this in the allegorical sense, in other words, in the historical perspective. So let's read. First, Rashi says, they have made me haughty. So Rashi first deals with the Hebrew word, here hivuni. They made my heart arrogant like Psalms, but their pride is toil and pain. So the same word for here hivuni is rahabam, is pride. Okay. They are haughty, rahav, idlers. Now, if you want to know Old French, Rashi knew French, assoiger in Old French, to make proud. Okay, we took care of the word. What does this mean in the historical sense? What does it mean that God tells the Jewish people, turn away from me, because if I look at you, I become haughty? What does that even mean? So Rashi says as follows, the Holy One, blessed be he, said, in this temple, what is this temple? The second temple, it is impossible to restore to you the ark cover, and the cherubim, which made me proud in the first temple to show you great affection until you betrayed me. In other words, what happened in the second temple? The Jewish people came back to rebuild the second temple, and they built a wonderful structure. And later it was renovated by King Herod, to the extent that the sages say anyone who has not seen the temple of Herod, the second temple, never saw a beautiful structure in his life. It was a beautiful structure. The problem was it was missing the main ingredient in the temple. It was missing the ark. There was no ark in the second temple. So it's missing the ark with the tablets and the covering of the ark and the cherubim. It's missing in some sense the most important ingredient. Why? So Rashi says, why? Simply because they didn't merit. It's like all the Jewish people didn't come back. And by the way, as a result of that, there were miracles that occurred in the first temple did not occur in the second temple. So if you came in the second temple, you didn't see any overt miracles, as opposed to the first temple where there were certain miracles that happened. So what's happening here is God is saying, so in the story, in the allegorical sense, God is saying, why in the second temple? Why was the second temple not on the same level as the first temple? So Rashi says, God says, don't look at me. Because when you look at me, telling his beloved, not because I don't love you, because when you look at me, I become too arrogant. What does that mean? I become too proud, become too happy. So Rashi says in the first temple, the Jewish people and God were looking at each other. In other words, they had a close, intimate relationship, expressed by the fact that the tablets and the ark is in the Holy of Holies. Because remember, what was on top of the ark? On top of the ark was the covering with the cherubim. What is the cherubim? It's a face. It's like two children, male and female, which represents the love and the intimacy between male and female, between God and the Jewish people. So in the first temple, you had a symbol of God and the Jewish people looking at each other face to face. What happens? That makes God so happy. And what does that do? That makes God show the people great affection. The danger of that is that when the people betrayed him, God was even more upset, and therefore God destroyed the temple. In other words, God is saying, don't look at me in the second temple. We cannot restore the relationship. And we can't look at each other face to face, not yet at least, because if we do, I become arrogant. I feel good. I feel excited. I feel uplifted. And then if there's going to be a betrayal, the betrayal is going to be much more severe. In other words, much more painful for God and therefore negative for us. So that's how you read this in the historical perspective. That God is saying, we rebuilt the second temple, we're restoring our relationship, but please don't look at me. Don't look at me in my eyes. Turn away, because when you look at me, it's too much. It makes me too excited. And so what's the problem with getting too excited? It makes me too excited. And what happened last time we get excited is God was so in love with the people that when they betrayed, he was so hurt. And if he was so hurt, the consequence of the Jewish people was negative. So this is an interesting story before we get to the Kabbalistic perspective. Now we're going to get to the Kabbalistic perspective, figure out what does it mean, turn away from me. And the Kabbalistic perspective is also going to connect it to the end of the verse, which is you're here. Your here is like a flock of goats. So let's just see what Rashi says about your here is like a flock of goats. In the small, the tender, and the slight ones among you, there is much praise. I guess here is the strands of here, which does not represent the great people, but even in the small tender Jewish people, in other words, even the people who are not great amongst the Jewish people, there's still much praise. Even your here is beautiful. That's the traditional way. And now we get to the Kabbalistic approach. But in the meantime, if anyone has comments, please share, just to make sure that we are on the same page. Because you have to acknowledge it's not typical what you say to somebody. If you love somebody, you're not typically going to say, turn away your eyes from me, right? But here we're saying, because of the history, because they were in love, and because they experienced the pain. Now, when God is praising her, he says, I love you so much, but do me a favor, turn your eyes away from me, because when you look at me, it makes me too excited. And if it makes me too excited, I'm vulnerable to betrayal again.
Rabbi, can I ask you a quick question?
Please.
The fact that she's not praising him directly and he's praising her right in her face, does it tell you that they speak different language, or we don't know his language? She doesn't know his language, she's too shy to speak directly. Does anybody talk about it? Does she ever talk to him directly?
It's not clear, because throughout the entire song, they speak to each other in first person in different places. You're the poet, so you'll get this, but it's not 100% clear that means that they're actually meeting. In other words, are they close? Are they intimate? So what I would say is, in this stage in the game, in the exile, she does not feel close to God, because God isn't hiding, God is in concealment. So her conversation with God is really, she's talking to the nations, she's talking to the other girls, telling them what she feels about God. But is she speaking to God in first person? No. Why? Because she doesn't feel that God is present in her life. When you talk about his perspective, when he praises her, he's speaking in first person, right? He's speaking in first person all the way around, or he's speaking in first person all throughout. So, right? He says, you are fear, my beloved. Turn away your eyes, your hair, your teeth, your temple, etc. So he is clearly speaking to her in the first person. What's happening? Because from God's perspective, and even in the exile, God is very close to the Jewish people. God is here. It's just that he's expressing his love in a different way, maybe hiding his face, etc. But from his perspective, from God's perspective, God could speak in the first person always, because God is always close to us. But we are not speaking to him in first person, certainly not in the exile, because we don't feel close to him.
Either that, or we don't speak his language, or maybe we're afraid that he's
I would say you're right. In other words, we don't speak his language in the sense that he expresses love also by hiding, and we don't see it that way, right? With child, when a parent disciplines a child, that's a language of love, right? That's a way that the child that the parent expresses their love for the child. It's easier to give kindness than to give discipline, but it's in some sense it's a deeper form of love to discipline. But the child doesn't speak that language, So the child does not interpret it in the same way.
Right.
Okay, now let's get to a little, so if everyone's clear about this, we can move to the Hasidic interpretation, and this is where the fun continues. I wouldn't say begins, but I would say continues. So the fun continues. What does it mean? We got to the point. We went through the song. We wrote all the waves. We got to the point that the Jewish people feel that the woman says, God knocked on the door, right? Last week we said the Hasidic interpretation. God is knocking on our door. God is sending inspiration to you, telling you, wake up, my sister, my bride, my dove, the one who makes me complete. And the soul responds to all this expression of God's showering and God's trying to awaken, showering inspiration upon the soul. And finally, the soul wakes up, and finally, the person is lovesick. Unbelievable. We reach the sort of the greatest heights. And what happens next? Says the Kabbalah, says the Hasidic interpretation, what happens next is God says, okay, you're lovesick, you came all this way, you created this love for God, it's wonderful, but now do me a favor. And love is an expression of when we look face to face. Face to face is an expression of love because when I see your eyes, I see inside, and it represents that your inside and my inside are aligned. As opposed to if I turn my back to you, that means my will, my desire is not facing you. But if I look in your eyes, it means my will is invested in you, my desire is invested in you, your desire is invested in me. Right? That's why it's not polite to stare at somebody's eyes, because it's an intimate expression, it's an intimate experience. So you can't sort of superimpose yourself on the other person in that way. So what does God say? Okay, you achieve the love, but you have to turn away. In other words, there comes a point where there's too much love. Don't awaken the love anymore. And this is an unbelievable concept, but it's a concept that's rooted in the Kabbalah. It's rooted in the Sefer Yetzirah and the book of formation. And that is, we say it all the time, that in the Hasidic thinking and the Kabbalistic thinking, there's ratzo vashov, there's running and there's returning. And running is the desire to escape the physical world and come close to God. And that's what the book has been doing until now, right? She's yearning to God in all different forms. Ultimately, she becomes lovesick. And how do we do that in our life? Specifically, we do that in our life throughout prayer. When we pray, we're awakening the love to God. We're tuning in to the voice of God who's knocking on our door, telling us that we are his sister, we are his bride, we are his dove, we are his perfect one, as we discussed last week. Okay, so we achieve the davening. We achieve through prayer. We achieve this great level of love. We're lovesick. We want nothing more other than to escape from Hashem, escape from this world and connect to Hashem. What does God say? That's not the greatest praise. The greatest praise is, do me a favor, you have to look away. Look away means stop looking at me in my face. Stop experiencing deep love, which causes you to escape the physical world. And you have to go back and you have to return to the world and you have to engage in the physical matter in order to uplift the world and bring the world closer to Hashem. So in the language of the Kabbalah, simply there's ratzo, there's the running, which happened till this point in this book. And now, what's the purpose of shu? What's the purpose of the stage right now? After the love, the purpose is shuv, is to return. So within my own soul, when I pray, I'm listening to God's voice knocking on my door. I respond. My heart goes out to him, as the verses explained last week. I'm looking at him. I'm looking at his eyes. And then God says, wonderful, you finished davening, you finished the prayer book, close the prayer book. In other words, don't pray a whole day. You have to turn away from me because you now have to go and you have to engage in refining and bringing holiness to the physical world. That's the big idea. Now let's see how this fits in the verse. Fits in the verse because what's the next verse? The verse says, what does the verse say? I'm sorry. The verse says, look away from me because they have made me haughty. What does that even mean? Turn away your eyes from me, for they have made me haughty. What does that mean? So what does haughty mean? Hirivuni means they have made me great. They made me, haughty means someone who's tall and someone who's great. Says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he says as follows. He says, why is it that somebody wants to pray and wants to come close to God and would resist turning away from God, meaning engaging with the physical world? What would be the motivation to resist to engage with the physical world? Because I'm in love with God. I'm in love with God and I want to be close to him. And to be close to him I have to be engaged in spiritual matters. That's the feeling that the person would have. Says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, oh, what you're doing is you're making a big mistake. What is your mistake? You're defining God as great. You're saying God is great. Great means sublime. He's high. He's exalted. And because he's exalted, you have to escape the physical to connect to the spiritual. So God is saying, the man is saying, stop looking at me. Stop being in love with me. Stop desiring to connect to spirituality. Because when you do, you're making a mistake. You're making me haughty. You're making me great. You're making as if I am uplifted. And the reality is God is not uplifted in the sense that he's not specifically in the spiritual realm. He's not in the spiritual realm. He's in the physical realm because for him, because he is infinite, both the physical and the spiritual are equal compared to him, in comparison to him. And this is a big deal. This is a concept that the Medrash, I believe it's in the Medrash, it's based on a verse in Tehillim in the Psalms, where the verse, the nations of the world say, Rama kol goyim Hashem, God is exalted upon all the nations. In other words, all the nations, their understanding of God is exalted, God is in heaven. And the verse continues, Rama kol goyim Hashem, God is exalted upon all the nations. Al hashamayim kevodai, his glory is in the heavens. In other words, if you stop a Gentile in the street and you say, where is God? You say, God is in the heaven. King David continues that verse. It's in the Hallel. King David continues that verse. And now he says, I'm going to introduce the perspective of Judaism. In other words, the true perspective. Then you know what? Let me pull up the verse so we have it. Let me pull up the verse so you don't have to believe me and you could see it for yourself. Okay, so we say this in the Hallel. It's Psalm number 113, which we say on holidays, and we say it on Rosh Chodesh. So let's read. So the beginning, Hallelujah, praise the servants of the Lord, praise the name of the Lord. May the name of the Lord be blessed from now unto eternity. From the rising of the sun until its setting, right, throughout the entire world, from the east to west, the name of the Lord is praised. The Lord is high over all the nations. Upon the heavens is his glory. So the Hasidic interpretation is, what does it mean? The Lord is high over all the nations. They say, all the nations say the Lord is high over. The Lord is great, but he's removed and he's an abstract. Where is God? Upon the heavens is his glory. Says King David, that's their perspective. Who is like the Lord our God, who dwells on high, who lowers to look in the heavens and the earth? Okay. So what does this mean? God is so great. He's not only in the heavens, he's also in the earth. But if you look at the way the verse is structured, he lowers to look in the heavens and the earth. Now, I understand why he lowers to look at the earth, but what does it mean that God lowers his eyes to look in the heavens, right? The heavens is where God is. We just said that in the earlier verse. Al shamayim kvoday, upon the heavens is his glory. So the glory of God is in the heavens. So that God doesn't have to lower himself to go to the heavens. So here is what the Hasidic interpretation says. The mistake is that God is great, that God is in the heaven. That's what the nations of the world think. God is great, he's in the heaven. Does he care what's going on earth? No, he's too great to worry about what's happening in this earth. What is the truth? The truth is, who is like our God? For God, both the heaven and the earth are a descent. He's not any closer to heaven than to earth. He's infinite. So spirituality or physicality are both the same for him. What does that do for us? God says, if you think that you have to escape the world and you have to pray and you have to be lovesick and you have to be completely dedicated to spirituality in order to have a relationship with God, what you're doing is you're making God great. You're saying God is spiritual, God is elevated, and that's a big mistake. because God is not great and spiritual in the conventional sense. He is also that, but he's not limited to that. And if you limit God to that, you're misunderstanding what God is. And therefore, God is saying, please don't stare at me. Please look away. Please learn how to find God in the physical world, because if not, you're making me haughty. You're making me arrogant. You're lifting me up, and I'm not closer to up. I'm not closer to the spiritual realms than I am to the physical realms. So this is completely revolutionary in what love means. In other words, we understood till now as love is the desire to get close to the person and be lovesick and look in their eyes. God is saying, you want to truly understand who I am, you want to truly be intimate with me, you don't have to look in my eyes. You don't have to escape the physical and come close to the spiritual. You can find me anywhere. So turn away from me and don't limit me to greatness as synonymous with spirituality, because you have to invest in the physical world and refine the physical world, and there you'll be just as close to God, if not more closer, because there you understand the truth of God, which is that God transcends both heaven and earth, and both heaven and earth are in equal descent for him. So that's a big idea. We're reading all about love, but here we get to the point. Finally, we get to verse 6, and we say, okay, enough with the love, start with the return. Enough with the running, start with the returning. Come back to the physical world. Don't escape the physical world. Come back and find the connection to God by refining, by investing in elevating the physical world without looking at God. Looking at God means being in tune to his spirit, to spirituality, to the sense of transcendence. And then, according to the Hasidic interpretation, here we get very Kabbalistic. Now we get to the second half of the verse. It's a little Kabbalistic, but you'll have to bear with me. To go back to the Song of Songs, give me a second. Back to the Song of Songs. Second half of the verse. Turn away your eyes from me. In other words, don't be in love. Don't stare at God in the sense of connecting to him spiritually, but turn away. You won't feel close because you feel like you're engaging in the physical world, but that's where you should be. You have to return. You have to return and bring that inspiration back to the world. Okay, your hair is like a flock of goats that stream down from Gilad. Gilad is a mountain, Mount Gilad. Here he gets a little complicating Kabbalistically. So I'm going to try to get in and out relatively quickly, and we'll see what happens. So I want to just give a little introduction about what does here mean in the language of the Kabbalah. Here is contradictory. The attitude toward here is contradictory. Sometimes here is positive, sometimes here is negative. For example, the Nazir, someone who makes an oath that he'll be holy like a priest, and he's not allowed to drink wine, and he's not allowed to become impure to the dead person. So he is considered very holy. The Nazir has to let the hair grow long. That implies that hair is synonymous with holiness. On the other hand, the Levite, who's also holy, working in the temple, the Levite has to shave his head before he comes to work in the temple. That implies that hair is unholy. Okay, so we have a contradiction. What is the deal with hair? So the Kabbalistic perspective is as follows. The metaphor of here represents as follows. Here is this paradox where there is something that is still part of your body, and therefore the hair grows because it has life from the body. On the other hand, the amount of vitality that is in the hair is so small and so minute that if you cut the hair, you don't feel any pain, right? So it's one thing, it's this something here where on one hand it's connected, it's part of you. On the other hand, it's tzimtzum, the amount of minimizing of the energy of yourself that's in the hair is it's such a minute amount of energy that when you cut it, you don't feel the pain. So that's a metaphor in the perspective of the Kabbalah. That's a metaphor for the greatest form of tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is a minimizing of the light. And the Kabbalah is very interested in tzimtzumim, all different forms and metaphors for minimizing the light, because the Kabbalah is very interested in how the lower world, the physical world, evolves from the spiritual worlds. And in a sense, what has to happen is the great light of God has to be concealed and minimized to create a lower realm. And there are many, many layers of many, many dimensions and worlds. There's at least 4 worlds, and each world includes many, many levels. But it's all a process from the Kabbalistic perspective. It's all a process of minimizing the divine light. Now, so what is here? Here is tzimtzum. It's a contraction of light because the energy of your body that's in your here is very minute. Now, is that good or bad? Well, it depends. If your starting point is infinity, you must have here to create the world. And therefore, here is a sense of holiness because it's the tzimtzum, it's the contraction to get from infinity to the finite world. But if the starting point, like the Levite is the sense of gvura, strength, is elevation, without getting into too much Kabbalah here, the Levite, the starting point is limitation, then putting a limitation upon limitation, that's already dangerous. That means you're coming too close to the point where the holiness is so minute that you don't even see it. So that's why we have contradictory attitudes to here, because in a sense, here is tzimtzum. Here is it's a profound minimization of the light of the body within something, yet that thing is still connected to me. Okay. Let's go back to our verse, the way we're explaining it. We're explaining it. God says, turn away your eyes from me. Turn away their awareness. Turn away from your involvement in spirituality and get involved in elevating and bringing sanctity and bringing holiness to the physical world. The physical world is the here. Why so? Because the physical world is the place where the light of God is so diminished, like the light of God, like the light of like the energy of the person, like the life force of the person is diminished within a strand of here. So here, in that sense, is go distant. And even in the physical body, instead of looking at the person face to face, I'm looking at their here. So I'm looking at their back. And Kabbalistically, looking at the back means you're not really connecting to their inner core, you're connecting to something external. So here may be beautiful, but it's external. I don't know anything about you from looking at your here. If I look at your eyes, now I'm connected to you. Now I feel you. Now I know if you're happy, if you're sad, if you're awake, if you're asleep. I don't know anything about this when I'm looking at your here. So the verse continues, and God says, turn away from me. And basically, don't look at me face to face. But you can get involved in the physical world, which is like here. How could you do so? In other words, how could it be that when we're going to be involved in here, which means the physical world, we can still be connected to God? So here it's like saying, here's what the verse says. Your here is like a flock of goats that streamed down from Gilad. What is Gilad? Gilad is a mountain. From the Kabbalistic perspective, mountain, so Rabbi Shneur Zalman himself right over here has many, many different ways of reading this verse. I'm going to take the easiest one to explain. The mountain is a metaphor of love in Kabbalah. Har, a mountain, is love. Because what is a mountain? It's where the earth goes upward. So it's where you are desired to come closer to Hashem. And that's why in the name of Aharon, Aaron, Moses' brother, who was the epitome of love, right? Aaron loved people. Aaron represents love. His name, the middle letters of his name is Har, is mountain. Aharon is spelled Aleph, Har, Nun. Aleph is the one, is God. Har is mountain. And Nun, a final Nun, is a straight line which descends beneath the line. In other words, it goes lower than all other letters. Aaron is the one who could draw God's love down into any dimension, into any space. So mountain is a synonym for love. So now what we say, when you're here, in other words, our involvement in God's here, our involvement in the reality where the divine light is so diminished, like here, we can be there and we can still stay close to God when we're in the realm of here. Why? Because the here is an expression of the mountain. It flows down from the mountain. The mountain is the love of God. Why are we invested in the physical world? Why are we involved in the physical world? It's an expression and an extension of our love to God. It's because God tells us, turn away from me, stop looking, go get involved and do the purpose of your creation, which is to bring holiness into the physical world. So when we do so, our involvement in the physical is an expression of our love to him. And that's why the here, this praise of the Jewish people, that our here is here that flows down from the mountain, is in the same verse as the verse where God says, please stop being in love. Stop just looking at me. Look away. go to the world and go invest and go illuminate the physical world. So this is, in short, if you want one word for this entire class, it's up till now. The Song of Songs was about ratzo, was about running, was about yearning to cleave to God. And now, after the ratzo comes the shuv. You have to return. You have to go away from the feeling of trying to be close to God and escaping the physical, but you have to bring that inspiration back to the physical, which is harder to do, but probably a deeper expression of the love. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is a story in short. And I'm just trying to think if I should cram in also verse 6. I think we'll leave it for next week. So I hope this was enjoyable. Of course, it's not as enjoyable as being in love. Being in lovesick is much more inspiring than turning away from the love, right? It's a difference between I love you so much, let's go and have dinner together, than if you love me so much, go run an errand for me, right? It's much easier to feel the love when we're sitting with God and looking at God's eyes, when we're studying Torah and praying. But God says, do me a favor. I have errands to run. Do me a favor. Turn away, go take out the garbage. There, it's much harder to feel the love, but that's really what God is saying. Turn away, because I can be found not only in the mystical, not only in the spiritual. If you think I can only be found in the physical, you're limiting me. And therefore, he says, turn away. And we understand that wherever we're doing, and all the errands that we're running, we are connected to God, because the fact that we're doing it is the here flowing down from the Mehar Gilad, from the mountain of Gilad. Why Gilad is mentioned, that's also explained, but that will be it for today. That's the story in short, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this was enjoyable for you. I really enjoyed it, so thank you for joining, so we can do this together and understand the true expression of love sometimes is to turn away and to do God's will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi, thank you very much.